Okay, we're live. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 169, the security podcast on the In30 network. We're going to call this Meltdown and Spectre. However, if you're in the Northeast, you are not melting down. You are, in fact, very, very cold. And I don't know what hashtag bomb genesis is, or bomb cyclone. Sorry, bomb cyclone. I don't know. Hopefully, Tom can explain a lot of this to us, even though he's not in the Northeast, and he's happy he's not melting down.
I believe, as an amateur meteorologist, I believe the bomb cyclone is when terrorists have packaged up bombs of snow and ice and winter weather and thrown them into an active cyclone that has tunneled its way towards the East Coast, and now everyone is being literally bombarded with winter weather from the skies.
I mean, this sounds like Sharknado with snow. I mean,
it's basically what it is.
So, but and then if you're in the Northeast like I am, it is absolutely frigid, and we don't see above freezing temperatures for the next week or so in New Jersey. I want to point that out. This is New Jersey, so
it was a pretty cold 40 degrees Fahrenheit here.
So. I mean, I'm okay. I have the heat working and everything else, so we'll be okay. And I'm actually off from school the last 2 days. I'm off yesterday, and when you hear this tomorrow, so I had a 4-day weekend. So, okay, on to our topic at hand. I will just caveat this by saying Tom knows a lot more about this than me, so I'm going to try and steer him into what we can do, because this gets real. I mean, we're getting silicone level type detail. So. Take it away.
Just a disclaimer, I am not a hardware engineer. I do not build processors for a living. I am nowhere near that smart. So I'm going to get some of these details wrong. But before we jump right into it, a moment of levity. So Daisy Owl on Twitter posted one of my favorite tweets of all time. If you ever code something that feels like a hack, but it works, just remember that a CPU is literally a rock that we tricked into thinking. And she follows this up by saying, not to oversimplify, first you have to flatten the rock and then put lightning inside of it. So, yeah, just one of my favorite funny little tweets.
Well, I want to just say, before we start, I think you should pause the episode right now. And if your device has a chip in it, any sort of on any operating system, see if you can update it. Like, we'll wait for you. Don't worry. You can come back. You can unpause us. That's how bad. We're telling you to not listen to us right now. Pause. Go see if you can update, and we'll tell you what you can update in a few minutes. Come back and then finish.
If you can't update, it's probably actually a past time to start thinking about getting rid of all electronics, getting rid of electricity, making a fire in the backyard, finding a good tent, and going back to the good old days before we had these computers and internet to worry about securing.
As the governor of Maine just said, and I quote, if you're worried about teenagers who worry about net neutrality should just read a book.
Oh my, so many things, but we already covered that episode for an episode and a half.
Yeah, so let's first start with any good name, any good vulnerability needs an awesome name.
Yes. So we've got Meltdown, and then we've got Spectre, which are fantastic vulnerability names, and of course they have a logo, because you can't have any of this without a great rocking logo to put behind it.
The Meltdown logo, however, looks like it was a stock photo that somebody just modified. And the Spectre logo is a ghost holding a stick, which I kind of like a lot better.
Yeah, I do like the ghost with the stick, because this is totally based on processor branch attacks. Yeah, this is going to get technical. I don't know of a way to make this not technical. Okay.
I'm going to try.
Yeah. So what this is, these are two vulnerabilities that kind of go after the same issue in processors. And this isn't something that can be fixed through microcode. It's not something that can be fixed through an update, it can be mitigated through an update. So you can update all your machines and your phone and everything to avoid running into this problem. But you can't actually fix it without fixing the hardware inside of the processor. This is a hardware level bug that cannot be programmed out. To fully fix and get rid of this bug, got to get rid of the affected processors, have to replace them with something brand new that don't have this bug. And right now, those processors are few and far between. Affected families of processors. Intel is affected by Meltdown. The others are not. Spectre affects just about every processor made since 1995. And that,
we
that
say
is not
commercial processors.
I don't know.
Okay. I was going to say, like, I mean, I don't know if you're running some IBM, like, is IBM Watson affected by this? I don't think Watson's running Intel chips.
Watson's more of a marketing term than anything else right now.
Like, but I mean, yes, I don't know if you want to say all chips, like all chip lives matter, but
if you have something with a chip in it,
it's probably affected.
Yeah, you are probably affected by
but if
this.
you're a sysadmin, you already know what we're talking about. So
yeah. So Google Project Zero has been at the forefront of this research, along with several universities. Great, awesome, super technical, low level, down to the hardware microchip level research on this. Fantastic research. But what's terrible is that we've been living with this vulnerability since 1995. And the way to fix Meltdown is pretty easy. A couple operating system patches to mitigate the issue, and that's fine. Spectre were not so lucky. The patches to avoid Spectre, depending on workload, may cause slowdown, and probably will. Basically, what happens is that a processor has a shared they call it the page table. It's basically virtual to physical memory mappings, and they split this right down the middle, where one half is going to be your kernel side memory mappings and memory addresses, and then over here on the other side, you've got your user-facing memory mappings, and your kernel, like the core of your operating system, is going to use the kernel side of the page table, and everything else you run, like your browsers and iTunes and whatever else you're running, Chrome, that's going to be using the user side. And these sides don't mix. They don't talk to each other. They're not allowed. The kernel operates in something called ring 0, and the user land operates in something called ring 3. And they're not really allowed to share state or talk with each other. What this does is it abuses a feature of processors that made them go stupidly fast. Where a processor says, hey, before I'm even sure if this will work, I'm going to try to run this code and see if it works over here first, just to get ahead of the problem. You can abuse those branches, and you can abuse that predictive analysis to essentially leak out memory, leak out kernel memory, ring 0 memory from ring 3, from your user facing application. So this means, if you had malware, or if there was a vulnerability in Chrome that allowed it to execute to take advantage of the Spectre bug, you could have that vulnerability leak out core protected memory. And we're talking things like, SSL keys. We're talking PGP keys. We're talking Bitcoin wallet addresses, usernames, passwords, anything and everything that exists in memory, in RAM, in your computer, could be leaked through this vulnerability. And again, this is mitigated with a really nasty hardware or performance impacting patch, which basically says, hey, we're not going to share a page table anymore. We're going to keep the most minimum viable level of mappings in the kernel space that we absolutely have to keep this machine running, while a user program is at the forefront, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize that to do anything like opening a file or do networking, or anything a kernel of an operating system would take care of. Reading a file system, writing to a file system, checking status of network interface cards, connecting to a new network, sending packets through. Basically, everything an operating system core would take care of. To do that, now the user side of the page table is completely wiped clean, and the kernel takes over. The kernel gets everything now. And then the kernel does the work, and then that's wiped clean, and then the user table comes back in. If you're not sharing the space, things get slow. Sharing the page table between kernel and root applications is a huge time saver. And by not having that, things are going to take a while. I've seen some benchmarks, and the efficacy and accuracy of these benchmarks has been argued. But I've seen some benchmarks saying that heavy database loads, you could see performance decrease by 30%.
I saw that too. I saw the 30% number, but I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, that means, so databases do, they do a lot of networking. They can do a lot of networking. They would do a ton of file reads and writes. And so when you tell Postgres or MySQL or Oracle or what have you, hey, put this in the database, it has to go over to the kernel and say, hey, write this to disk, please, or read this from disk, please. Do the analysis, do the processing on the user application side in Ring 3, and then hand the result back to whoever asked for it. That is a perfect example of the kernel and a user application interacting really closely with each other, and it's something that would be slowed down by these patches. Unfortunately, not using the patches or not implementing the patches is simply not an option. Because do you remember way back when we talked about Heartbleed, and we talked about Cloudbleed, and all these things that leaked memory out, and it was so dangerous because you could get everything from SSL keys to passwords out of this. This is that, but for the whole computer, for every processor, or almost every processor made since 1995. I'm telling you this without any kind of exaggeration. This is the biggest, most widely impacting security event I have ever seen in my entire life. Ever. Hands down.
We were talking before the show of a way to try and give it a good analogy to something that people would find, not necessarily hardware or software, but some real life event. And Tom came up with, if you remember the Ford Pinto, like back in 1975, of exploding, where you had to go and stop it now. Oh, I got one. The Note 7.
That's a good one too. Yeah,
there you go. It's the Note 7 debacle from last year, where they had to fix the battery issue, and there was no such thing as not have it. Well, I'll just not charge it all the way, or I'll just be careful with it. No, they made sure like planes were downed, as in not flying, because there was a Note 7 on board. They wouldn't let you fly with it. They wouldn't let you do anything, and Samsung had to basically replace it. I almost want to say it's like that, except it's not blowing up or exploding. It's taking the contents of your computer, the secure stuff, the stuff that will let bad guys get all your information. So imagine the Note 7 battery issue with Equifax on the backside. Like, we're just going to grab that data, and being the person there can just say, "Oh, you want my passwords? Well, let's just file through the file system that we have. I'm sure it's there, and give it away."
Yeah, this is really bad. And unlike the Note 7, Intel can't just, and AMD and the various ARM partners, like, this isn't just an Intel issue. Intel is really susceptible to Meltdown, which is a pretty easy attack to pull off, from what these researchers are saying. Spectre is a little bit harder, but proof of concept code exists that shows that, yes, you can read arbitrary memory contents, and you can get privileged information from a kernel through the Spectre vulnerability, which affects just about everyone. Phones, AMD, Intel, ARM, Samsung processors. I mean, just about everything. You name it, it's probably affected by Spectre due to the way modern processors are just built. And
Well, let's take
that's
an iPhone thing. So if you have, let's say, Touch ID or Face ID, that's in the secure enclave of the iPhone, right? When you put your thumb on the little home button. So can we leverage that? I mean,
I need to
I know
look at
you may not know,
yeah, I
but
need to look at my white paper again for Apple's security stuff. But if it's on a separate chip and the kernel itself, the main processor never gets the private key information, then no, you couldn't leak from the secure enclave. If the secure enclave is, just a fancy way of saying it's going to be kind of secure, which I don't believe it is. I think it's actually a separate, you know, chip on the main board. And the kernel interacts with that at all, it gets private key material at all, then yes, you could leak private key material through this vulnerability. And it's because this affects just about everyone, because it's been around, just about forever. There's no mass recall here. There's no way for Intel and AMD and everyone else to say, well, that's all, guys. Ship us back all your computers now. No more processors for everyone. They would literally have to recall most of the electronics in the world. This is kind of a big deal. It will be mitigated, and for you sitting at home, panicking, freaking out, taking all your computers and throwing them in the dumpster right now, you don't have to. I'm certainly not going to. Operating system patches do exist or will exist very shortly. Microsoft is going to push out their stuff on Patch Tuesday. Most Linux distributions are already running the brand new Linux kernel, which does fix this vulnerability. I think OS 10 is protected some of the way, but not all the way.
So Apple, we check this. If you're on, so I'm using a High Sierra as the benchmark here. So if you're on 10.13.2, you're like 75% of the way there, and then the next they are rushing out a 10.13.3, which should be available very, very soon. So you're half protected at this point.
Yeah. So Meltdown is the easy one to fix. Spectre is what I imagine D1 OS 10 are not protected against yet, and it does come with performance implications. That fix will hurt. It's not going to make your computers useless. People have been estimating that for most users, you're not really going to notice too much of an impact because most users aren't doing super resource intensive things. And the most popular example of heavy computer usage is gaming. And this doesn't really affect PC gaming all that much. You might see maybe a very minimalistically increased load time when you're pulling stuff off of a hard drive. But PC gaming isn't going to be, really affected by this at all for all intents and purposes. Doing something like databases, if you're running, a big giant database.
We're not talking Excel here.
Yeah, no, we're not even talking Access here. Like if you're running a Postgres database that tons of people are hitting, and you're using your home computer as a server for some reason, you would probably be affected by this. I could see maybe something like Lightroom, where you're loading a bunch of files all at once, or writing to a bunch of files all at once. Yeah, that could get slower. It's.
What about your home router, like a PF box?
That would see. I imagine that would see a little bit of impact.
Because you're doing you're doing tables, you're doing DHCP tables, but you're not. It's not a lot of it. It's not hundreds of times a second.
That's a user-facing application, right? So as long as it doesn't call back to the kernel to do something like changing state or, I'd need to look into it. The FreeBSD project, the security team did say that work is ongoing to develop and commit these mitigations to the repository as soon as possible, with updates for release to follow. I'm looking for the latest and greatest message here.
Well, the issue becomes, and I mean, it's you have this vulnerability, It affects everyone. Everyone now needs to update. It's Chrome and Firefox. Chrome on January 23rd said they're releasing it. Firefox, I think we said you need to be on Firefox 57, should mitigate this disaster. And we use that word mitigate as in it's not going to stop it. It's going to do its best to stop it. And if you say, well, I have viruses, virus scan, well, you got to make sure that's updated. In fact, the Windows update makes you disable. I think it makes you actually disable your virus scan just to install the update, because I think what they're trying to do, the updates are, the virus scan is going to catch that and flag that as a false positive, saying, whoa, wait a second, what are you doing to this thing? This looks really bad, and they're making you stop it for the time being. Update it. This is let the software update as much as it can, but still know that you're still vulnerable if malware can get on your computer and can back end through this. Like, you get malware on your computer, you run it, and it can disable all these mitigation techniques.
So with Spectre, data won't be changed. It won't be corrupted, but it can be read, which Intel, in their ever so wise press release, said that Intel, and this is a direct quote from newsroom.intel.com. Intel believes that these exploits do not have the potential to corrupt, modify, or delete data. Yes, that's true. Here's the sentence before that. Intel and other technology companies have been made aware of new security research describing software analysis methods that, when used for malicious purposes, have the potential to improperly gather sensitive data from computing devices that are operating as designed. Emphasis mine. Yes, Intel. Yes, everyone else. Your processors are operating as designed, and they're operating in a very insecure manner that's leaking data. It's hard to really affix blame. I mean, this has been a problem since 1995. Processors and modern processor design has, been ever changing, and we're trying to eke out every little bit of performance we can. But there are security implications to the things that we're doing if we're not super, super, super careful. And security issues in a processor is kind of a worst case scenario, because it's not something you can easily fix or work around. And as we're seeing now, it's all kind of come to a head. So yeah, run your updates for Android. The January 5th security patch level, that monthly roll-up, that will also have a fix to these vulnerabilities, or a mitigation, rather. I keep saying fix. Unfortunately, we keep giving the same advice as always. Run your patches, stay up to date.
And if you can't stay up to date, you may want to think about replacing that device, because we talked about this before the show. How many phones will never see another update?
Yeah.
And you said, well, okay, how is this going to affect me? Okay, there's one. What about the vulnerability last week that we were talking about, the crack vulnerability with the Wi-Fi, and then Rowhammer before that, and all these other vulnerabilities at some point. Okay, and at some point you will get burned. Hopefully you're not getting burned tomorrow, but at some point this will hit you. And it may not cause you financial stress, but it just waste time, waste energy, and you're doing all these things. And this is why we recommend phones that do get updated, whether it be an iPhone or a Google phone, whatever it is, or a Samsung phone at this point. So,
yeah. So let's talk about disclosure. So in the main Project Zero blog post, which I have to highly recommend if you are technical in nature, if you want to see the rawest of the raw data and the actual testing and science that went into proving this vulnerability out and researching it, check out googleprojectzero.blogspot.com.
We put this in the show notes. So there's in fact two entries there on the show notes for this, the long one, the short one.
Yeah. The long one has got some awesome stuff. It's got graphs. It's got sample code. It's got the way processors work. It's got just insane levels of detail. That's just beautiful. They really did a bang up job in putting this post together. In this post, they claim that they reported this issue to Intel, AMD, and ARM on June 1st, 2017. So yes, fixes have been, these companies and Google and the researchers have all been working on a fix for this for at least the past 6 months. It was supposed to go live, from what I've read, next week. It didn't, because of the nature of open source operating systems, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not blaming the Linux kernel project at all, but the kernel maintainers did the best they could. They redacted comments. They kept commit messages pretty quiet and kind of just beating around the bush a little bit. Didn't really say what this was for, but they were making some pretty low level changes to the kernel and how the kernel works with certain processors. And people caught on, and the Register, Ars Technica, and several others started putting out articles saying, hey, this looks like a really bad vulnerability. Some low-level stuff is being changed. This could be bad. So with the speculation, with the heightened media attention, people started crafting proof of concept code samples to try to exploit this without really knowing what was happening, except they had the code samples to prove that they could. So that's why the disclosure got moved up and everything got released a week early. So yeah, it's something to think about, and definitely interesting that the open source nature of the Linux kernel means that anyone can look at all the code at any time, and that's good. And we've seen there are a few negatives. I think the positives vastly outweigh any negatives anyone could ever have about open source. But yeah, it was just interesting.
And again, for the average person, what this means is you have to sit down and you have to update all your machines. You have to shut down. You have to go through the whole update procedure. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort, but you have to do it. And we're talking about literally everything. Like, your TiVo or your cable box that will never be updated. Yeah, those two. But for the time being, try and do everything you can, just like crack, just like the other ones. And you're going to have to update. And this is, again, where you call up your phone company and say, how come my phone isn't being updated? Maybe enough people will push that they'll start worrying about these things. And
yeah, that would be nice. If you are building or buying a new computer or a new phone anytime soon, I don't have any advanced knowledge on when new processors will be released that aren't susceptible to this bug. But I know for me, I was looking at doing a new build. I don't have to build a new machine right now. It's just kind of a nice to have. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait till the next gen of processors comes out that's not susceptible to Spectre.
And you got to trust that Intel actually does do that. And AMD and ARM and all them.
Everybody will be under the magnifying glass. I am absolutely sure that if a new processor family is released that is vulnerable, we will know about it, and we will know about it very, very quickly.
So, anything else on this subject is very long. If you have more questions, again, the WhatsApp group is your best spot for it. We will do our best to try and make it understandable to everybody, and how to explain it to your grandparents. How do you explain it to your grandparents? Just tell them to update. In fact, just don't tell them to update. You just go there and do it for them.
Yeah.
Find a reason to get over there. Say it's some random holiday.
I'm sure other podcasts and every article in the show notes that we've covered, especially there's a fantastic Ars Technica article on the title is "What's Behind the Intel Design Flaw Forcing Numerous Patches." It is a fantastic article that goes, just slightly, a little bit into how processors keep track of memory. So we like to keep this pretty high level, but if you wanted to get excuse me, a low level overview of these issues, there are plenty of places to do that. Or you can ask in the WhatsApp group.
By the way, CNN, it's on the front page in red. So if you're
Really?
on, yeah, so CNN front page, all Macs and iOS devices affected by chip flaws. So I don't know where your political leanings are, but it's on CNN. I checked Fox News, it's not there. I checked MSNBC, it's not there. I'm trying to find out. I'm on yahoo.com. I'm trying to go where your parents would end up going to.
Yeah.
I don't see it there. I mean, I see Taylor Swift and celebrity news and everything else, but
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I cannot think of a bigger security vulnerability than this one right now.
so again, update your computers and just stop everything you're doing, update, and then come back and enjoy your life. And if you're in the Northeast, you're not doing anything anyway. So I mean, you're covered in snow, so just go do it now. Okay. Well, we're out of time. Again, any more questions, join the WhatsApp group, and I guess we'll see you next week. Or not next week, 2 weeks.
Yes, 2 weeks.
Okay. Anyway, have a good night. Bye.
See you, everybody.